Voice is not audible, ma. Please check your voice.
May I? I'm audible, sir.
Yeah, it's okay. Perfect.
A very good evening, everyone. This is Rajeshwari. It is a great privilege to me to invite all the participants to the hugest virtual gathering conducted in accordance to IEEE PES Day event 2022, conducted by Swarnandhra College of Engineering and Technology. PES Day officially formed in the year 2008. Every year, a team has been selected for this event, and many programs like educational and technical activities, humanitarian activities, and some contests are conducted in this team for organizing the members. And also, in this year, we are celebrating this event in interaction with the team of Powering and Sustainable Future, Be Clean, and the Resilient Power and Energy Technologies. And also the Swarnandhra College of Engineering and Technology, IEEE student branch, and PESSB chapter came front to conduct this webinar on HAC site project proposal. Well, now may I request the principal of our institution, Dr. S. Suresh Kumar sir, to address the gathering in accordance to the event of PES Day celebrations.
Sir is not. Sir is not available. Later he may join. You go with further session.
And if we go ahead of this program, now I'm inviting the counselor of IEEE student branch, Professor V. Madhu sir, to start the program.
Hearty welcome to everyone. This is Madhu, PS advisor for Swarnandhra College of Engineering and Technology. Today we have an eminent speaker, Javier Urquizo. It's very privileged to introduce our today's speaker. Javier Urquizo was born in Guayaquil. He received his BSc degree in telematics engineering from ESPY University, Ecuador in 2012, and his MSc degree in renewable energy from Newcastle University, Newcastle, United Kingdom in 2013. He is currently PhD candidate in electrical engineering at Villanova University in EC department under the supervisor of Dr. Pratipal Singh. His research aims to estimate how well a Lithium-ion battery performs, develop insights into how the battery is aging and its prominent degradation mechanisms while operating a frequency regulation application. He has been an IEEE graduate student member, IEEE site member, and IEEE PS member since 2017. He has written and collaborated on preparing several IEEE site and IEEE HAC project proposals, which are receiving funding. He has been involving in teams deploying humanitarian projects in Ecuador, focusing mainly on education, connectivity, and energy assets. In 2021, he received Delaware Valley Young Electrical Engineer of the Year from IEEE Philadelphia section for his work on humanitarian projects. Now it's time to hear from today's speaker, Javier Urquizo. The floor is yours, sir. Javier, sir.
So, hi, everyone. Can you all hear me? I believe so. Thank you. Thank you, Mala, for that introduction. And thank you all for being here this evening. It's morning for me, but thank you very much for being here for my presentation. I'm going to start by sharing my screen, and hopefully you can confirm that it's working. So we can start with my presentation. So hopefully you can all see this presentation.
Yes, sir. Yes, it's perfectly perfect.
Great. Thank you very much. So today I'm going to go over this presentation, which I prepared very much based on my experience on developing projects in Ecuador and working with the IEEE Ecuador section, which is the country where I'm from. And hopefully I'm going to go over this presentation in 30 to 40 minutes, and then we'll have sufficient time for questions and and any comment or feedback that you may have. So hopefully you're going to enjoy this presentation. So today I'm going to be talking about writing an HAC or site project proposal. And I've written a few. I've gotten about 6 or 7 proposals in and have been funded. And here in this initial slide, you can see some of the pictures of the projects I've been involved in, mainly in energy access, education, and connectivity, as mentioned in the introduction. So, oops, if we go ahead with the next slide. So the first question is, I guess the most important when you're trying to get a project started is trying to know where to start. And some of the things you have to consider is the most important thing first is the project. What is the project you're going to be working on? Particularly for HAC and site projects, you need to consider that the project has to follow the SDGs or Sustainable Development Goals, which if you're not familiar with them, we're going to be covering them in a little bit. The next thing you need to consider is that the project needs to improve the quality of life. That's one of the most important things we're going to be covering in humanitarian projects is how to improve the quality of life of the users. And finally, one of the most important things too is that it has to be focused on local community development. Those are I would say the 3 pillars when you start thinking about your project is you need to consider all of them in order to, build up a strong proposal and get funding to deploy your idea. The next thing you want to do when you start thinking about your project is looking at the call for proposals. So, HAC, the Humanitarian Activities Committee, and SITE, the Special Interest Group in Humanitarian Technologies, are regularly putting out call for proposals in order to support IEEE member grassroots projects that utilize technology to address pressing needs of the members' local communities. And I think this sentence covers a lot of important things that you need to consider at the moment you're writing your proposal. You want to highlight the IEEE member grassroots projects to acknowledge that you need to be engaged with your local organizational units, local IEEE units, be it IEEE sections, be it IEEE student branches, in order to develop the project. And that's going to be important when you fill the administrative part of your proposal. So you want to have a good relationship, interact with your IEEE section, and make them aware of the project and all the ideas you have to implement it. The second thing that I think it's important is the project itself and the goal, the needs that's going to be addressing, which regularly comes under section 1 of your project proposal. So we're going to go over them in a few more detail in the next few slides, but I just want to make you aware of all the things you need to consider when you're starting to think about, making or writing a project proposal for IEEE site and IEEE HAC. One thing, as I mentioned before, that's very important and has to be rooted in local communities. And one way of doing that is to develop local partnerships with local stakeholders. So you need to be aware of what are the needs and work with the communities in trying to develop a solution that will have lasting impact. That's one of the most important things. And that generally is described in the second section of your project proposal, which, as I said, we're going to cover in the next few slides. The third thing that's important too is the technology that's going to be addressing the community needs. So depending on the technology, it could be agriculture technology, it could be information and communication technologies and connectivity, it could be medical technology, it could be sustainable power, which I think it's one of the most important or one of the main or more common projects that you generally see are addressing sustainable power. You could also make a project for water, sanitation, and health, and other areas that might need addressing in a community as well. So generally in section 3 in your project proposal, you'll be addressing the technology you're going to be using in more detail. So that's something you need to consider as well. Whoops. So the last thing you want to consider is the sustainability and management of the project. That's always important to consider because the type of efforts we're trying to put forward. We don't want to have like a kind of a parachute project in which we're just dropping equipment, we're just dropping technology and we leave, and then the project doesn't have the impact that we're looking for. So we must consider how the project is going to impact the community and how the project can continue to, create value and improve quality of life in time, not just the beginning of the project when it's being constructed. So you must consider the sustainability of the project. You must consider the goals and all the activities you're going to be completing in order to achieve that goal. And that generally goes under section number 4. In addition to this, writing a strong budget, it's also important, which is going to be section 6, I believe, and we're going to cover that in the next few slides as well. So continuing with the idea of where to start, one of the best things you could do at the beginning is, gather a lot of information about how to write a good and strong project proposal. One of the first things I would recommend is to read thoroughly the call for proposals and read thoroughly all the application form. So you want to have a good understanding of what are the questions that are going to be asked and how to address them. So starting with the call for proposals, there's a lot of good writing resources in it. So where do you find the call for proposals? If you go to hac.ieee.org, you will get to this screen here where you can find in funding opportunities, IEEE, HAC, and site projects. You'll see all this information about the call for proposals, which generally has a lot of information about what type of projects can be funded, the duration of the project, the amounts you can ask for, and in general has a lot of good resources that you can review. You can also get to this information through site.ieee.org. So there's a lot of good resources and information you should review at the start of your project so you know how to put together a strong proposal. The second thing I would also advise is you can look for additional resources that you can find on IEEE site and IEEE Learning Network. You can look at this, and I can share the slides later, but you can look at the link here where you can access IEEE site. I believe now it's called Virtual Classroom. This may be from an older slide, but you can find webinars and more information about, how to make a good introduction to the project, how to put together a good budget, how to, what's the process that goes through submitting a project proposal and all this other information that's available for you for free online. So it's definitely worth checking it out. I also recommend, and I did this in anticipation to this webinar or this presentation, I checked out the IEEE Learning Network resources where they have this course that's called Project Assessment, Monitoring and Evaluation, which is completely free to register for. And it's a 1-hour duration workshop where you can find more information about how to make good project assessment, monitoring and evaluation, which is always important to take into account when you're working in designing a project proposal. So before we get to where the application can be submitted, one additional resource that I think is very important, and I don't think a lot of people mention it, is one good resource is the IEEE Explore webpage. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but that's where a repository of research papers and books and information reports on IEEE. And you can go into that webpage and access all this sort of information. One conference that I recommend you to review is the Global Humanitarian Technology Conference. It's going to be in, I believe, in California this year. So it's always a good idea to look at projects similar to the one you're thinking of and try to look for lessons learned and what were the pitfalls, and if anything, just connect with that other researcher to learn more about the project, which can also help you not only put together a stronger proposal, but also learn a little bit more while you're implementing the project on what to do and what not to do. And it can even be, you know, a researcher that's working in the same area as you, in the same country. So it's always good to connect with that extended network in IEEE. And I think looking at papers that are addressing projects similar to the one you're thinking is very important as well. So once you have looked at all this information, you can also look at the application and, you know, review the questions they're going to be asking you. And to do that, you must go to this link here, or the grantinterface.com, which is the IEEE, you know, proposal management webpage, where it looks sort of similar like this, where you have, you know, a login page where you can put the email and password. If you're starting a project from the beginning, you may want to create a new account. But I'm going to talk about it a little later too, but it's the only way you can start a new project is if you have an IEEE professional member in your team. So it's always a good idea as a student to, you know, talk to professors and teachers, or your advisor, your IEEE PS advisor like Madhu, in order to, you know, recruit a good and strong team in order to start the proposal. So as a student, you're not able to create a new account to apply for a project, but it's always a good idea to look for teachers and engineers and professionals to help you with strengthening your proposal. So once you log into the web page, this is sort of what it looks like, and you can look for this button. I don't know if you can see it, but it says apply here, and then you can see again the call for proposals and what the focus of this call for proposals is, and you can go through it and get to a section where you can start to building your proposal, which will be submitted through this portal, and then, you know, you're going to go through all the rest of the steps until you find out if the project's been funded or not. So it's always important to look at what are the requirements and what the timing of the proposal is and how much money you can request for. And all of that can be found here in the IEEE Grant Interface portal. So one more thing I should also advise when you're starting the proposal is once you go through the all the questions in the grant interface, there's also 2 additional documents that you generally should fill and add to attach to your proposal, which are the project assessment metrics and the budget for the IEEE site project application. So I'm going to cover these in the last 2 sections of this talk. So we're going to go through them and show you examples of how to do those documents and prepare them so you can have a strong project to submit to IEEE. So once you've reviewed all this information about where to start with a project, then you can go over to the grant interface and start talking about or writing about your project overview and community needs, which correspond to sections 1 and 2 of writing a proposal. So when you start thinking about your project, it's always important to, you know, look at the Sustainable Development Goals, which are a set of 17 goals that were developed by the United Nations in order to create a more sustainable future for all. And you can see, if you're not familiar with them, they're ranging from no poverty to quality education, gender equality, affordable and clean energy, reduce inequalities, climate action, responsible consumption, peace, justice, and strong institutions. So they cover a wide range of goals and targets in order to make a more sustainable future. So I've mostly been involved in projects looking at goal number 4, quality education, and goal number 7, affordable and clean energy. So I think some of the examples that I'm going to share today are mostly focused on those. Another thing to consider when creating or thinking about your project and the goals of your project is we want to create smart projects. So what do I mean by smart is we want to create projects that have specific goals. We want to create projects that have goals that are measurable. We want to create projects that have goals that are action oriented. We want to create projects that have relevant goals, and we want to create projects that are time-based. So SMART project takes into account all these different considerations in order to create goals that will, make a strong project and a strong proposal for you to submit to IEEE. And then one of the things you want to consider too is ask yourself, is the project relevant? So is this project going to be relevant to the local community? Is it going to, again, look at enhancing their quality of life? Is it going to have the impact that we want? Or is there a different technology that I can use to achieve this goal? So those are some of the things you want to ask yourself when you're creating a project. Is the project going to be effective? Can the project meet the goals that it initially set out to? Does it benefit the community? Does it create, a problem for the community, or does it create more of a burden for the community? So all those things you want to consider. Is the project going to be efficient? Are the costs of the project reasonable considering the results? Does the project use the local resources that are available in the community? Those are things you also want to consider when creating your project. And finally, as I said before, the sustainability. Do you have a sustainable business model? Is this a project that's going to continue in time after you leave? Will the community be able to take charge of the project? So all of those things are important to consider. And I think this is something you want to review and think about as you start writing your proposal, and as you engage with local stakeholders. You want to make sure you're addressing these points in order to have a more impactful project. So now I think it'll be helpful for you to just go through some examples. And I have here one project that I worked with. And what I wanted to show you is some of the needs of this community and how we address those needs in the project that was proposed. So this project was a site project. It was submitted for proposal, I believe, in 2018. And this community is called Cerrito de los Morreños, is located about 28 miles south of Guayaquil, which is one of the largest cities in Ecuador. And basically it's a community in an island of 900 inhabitants living in about 96 homes or dwellings with restricted access to electricity. So because they're in an island, there's no electric grid that will reach them. So power was provided through a 195 kilowatt diesel generator. So that means it needs to be constantly fueled. So electricity was only available from 6 p.m. till midnight. So for the rest of the day, the community didn't have access to electricity. This community paid $1 per day per household for electricity. So that covered mainly the cost of fuel, but it did not consider the cost of maintenance for the generator. So every time the generator was out, there had a lot of issues with coming up with the funds to repair it. So it didn't consider that for the sustainability of the project. So one more thing to consider is once we made a needs assessment visit to the community, we found out that there was a European Union group that installed PV systems in each of the homes in the community. Unfortunately, after a few weeks and even months, those systems failed because the community members didn't know how to take good care of those systems. So taking all of those components into account, we proposed the following project. So we had a proposal to rehabilitate about 40 of the solar home systems, which covered about half of the community. And we try to look for homes where we have large families and where we can have the greater impact with the project. And I must say also that this project was done over 2 phases. So in the first phase, we looked at 20 homes. The second phase, we looked at additional 20 homes. So when we asked for the funding, we considered the amount of funding for the amount of homes we could rehabilitate with that funds. It's also important that training and capacity building was essential for the deployment of the project. You can see here in the picture in the left where we train the community in how to take care of the project, and that's enabled them to even now have the system continue to be working even a few years after the project was deployed. Community members' participation in workshop and rehabilitation activities was very important, and we also included that from the start. We got commitment from the community members for their participation and for their engagement both in training and rehabilitation activities with the project. So even now with access to electricity, the community has been able to improve their quality of life, because its access to electricity has not only enabled them to turn on lights and use household appliances, but it's also allowed them to now have connection to the internet through an internet service provider. They've improved healthcare services with access to different equipment in the health center with access to electricity. So access to electricity was initially the goal, but that's enabled them to continue to improve their quality of life with access to other services like connectivity and improved healthcare services. The second project that I want to briefly talk about is the project we're developing in the Galapagos Islands. So that's a connectivity access, and that was a Humanitarian Activity Committee project. So as you may know, the Galapagos Islands are one of the world's greatest tourist attractions, and it's located about 1,000 kilometers west of Ecuador. One of the issues that not many people are aware about is that the internet connection is really bad. The internet connection is enabled through satellite connections to the O3B network, but it is slow and very expensive due to the limited bandwidth that a satellite connection allows for. So access to resources for education is very scarce, since most of schools don't have access to the internet. And in addition, there's no public libraries in 3 of the 4 populated islands of the Galapagos Islands. So there's no way to get access to additional resources other than the ones that are provided by the Ministry of Education in books that are given to all of the students. So in addition to this, teachers generally lack computer skills to prepare presentations and have a digital tools to aid them in the preparation for classes and delivery of classes as well. So initially what we proposed is the community intranet to improve the access of resources for education in the Galapagos Islands. So one of the things that we found out is that there was a lot of dark fiber in the Galapagos, so fiber optic connections that were not being used. So we use some of the available fiber infrastructure to connect directly to 5 of the schools within an island. So we enable those connections to a local server, which we created using Model 3 Raspberry Pis, which you can see here in the right, and loaded up a bunch of services and information resources, educational resources that they can get access to each of the schools through fiber optic connections and Wi-Fi routers at the last mile. So again, training and capacity building was essential for the deployment of the project. And here we can see one of our volunteers, training with some of the students and how to access these resources and how to use them for their classes. And even some of the students became inspired to pursue, STEM careers. And one of the main or one of the unintended successes of this project was that a lot of the female students were empowered by female volunteers and female presenters, leading the workshops, and they were empowered and become inspired to pursue STEM careers themselves, which was something we didn't think about at the beginning of the project, but it was a great consequence, a great lesson learned for us in developing this project. So here, I just wanted to let you know about some of the needs in the projects that we encounter, and how we use some of the local resources like the dark fiber. In the case of the solar system, we use some of the solar panels from the previous installation to lower the cost. So it's important to know what are the resources already available in your community and how to make those connections with local stakeholders to, develop a great and strong proposal to present for IEEE and HAC projects. So one thing I should note also from this initial community intranet, many education initiatives have followed where we have about 4 or 5 projects implemented based on this initial project in the Galapagos Islands. And we continue to working with them to, enhance the quality of materials and information they have for education over there. So once we've covered the initial 2 sections, the next section is the project assessment. So this looks at, what's your plan for managing the project and how to keep track of all the results that you're gonna, do in the duration of the project. So IEEE uses the logic model, which is a useful framework for writing goals and outcomes and indicators. So we want to be comfortable with this nomenclature, because this is sort of the things we need to think about and consider when you're writing a plan and looking for the writing a project plan, a management plan, and the assessment plan. So what are the inputs? Inputs are all the components that are invested or used at the beginning of your project, be it, if it's a solar installation, there'll be all the materials, the equipment, like solar panels, like batteries, controllers, etc. Activities are all the things that you plan to accomplish in the duration of the project. So what the activity is, who's going to do that activity, what you're going to do once you get to the community, etc. All those things are included in the activities part of it. The outputs are the direct consequences of the activities that you plan to do. So who is reached with this project, who in the community is affected or has received the installed solar panels, how many systems are installed, and what are the results for the community or for the stakeholders. Outcomes are what are the direct consequences of the implementation or the output of your project. So outcomes in this case are what changes occur over time. So if you go back to the solar installation project, this could be enhanced access to electricity for the community, or it could be access to connectivity through an internet service provider. And what is the impact of that intervention? Increased grades for students because now they have access to additional resources, or now they have lights and are able to finish their homeworks even in the evening. So that kind of impact is part of the outcomes of your project. So one useful way to, or one simple way to think about it is what are all the inputs, outputs, and outcomes you need for baking a cake, for example. So the inputs will be all the materials that you need to bake a cake, sugar, butter, eggs, milk, etc. The activities are all the things you do in order to take those ingredients and get to a final baking of a cake. So you need to preheat the oven, you need to grease the pan, mix all ingredients, bake for 15 minutes, etc. The output is based on those activities, what is the direct consequence of that? So if you preheat the oven is heat at 350 degrees and when the cake is ready to go in. If you grease the pan, then the pan is covered in grease. If you mix all ingredients, all the batter is ready, etc. And the outcomes are, since you preheat the oven, then the cake bakes evenly and it's finished cooking time. Since you grease the pan, it comes out without sticking, and so on. So all of these things it's a good example for you to consider in, completing your project. What are the activities, what are the outputs, and what are the outcomes you're going to achieve in the duration of the project. Another thing you want to consider are external or environmental conditions, which I'm going to cover maybe a little bit further. What additional things you need? You need electricity, you need gas, you need, the number of people that are going to come, etc. So all those things are important to consider when, putting together a plan for your project. Once you have that clear, the next thing to do will be to start filling the assessment matrix, which is the first document that I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation that you need to fill in order to submit for your proposal. So in here, the things you need to note is you have your project name, you have the main objective of the project, and you have a number of outputs and outcomes you need to fill in. Here you have indicators, a definition of how this indicator is calculated, a baseline of what is the value at the start of the project, before the project, what is the target of the project, what is the monetary cost of that indicator at the end of the project, and where you got that information, how often you measured it, who's responsible for measurement, and where this is going to be reported. So all this information you need to complete in order to submit your project proposal. So here we have a brief example, again, going back to the example of a renewable energy storage system with solar power and batteries. So let's just go through the output for solar power rechargeable batteries. So an indicator is the number of solar power batteries that are installed or adopted by a community. How do you calculate it? In this case, they said the total number of signed contracts for a new solar power battery. At the beginning of the project, the value was 0, and at the end of the project, that target value is 45. So the value at the project close will be, how much it costs to install 45 batteries in the community. The data source, how is this measured? You have your partner, you have NGOs, you have surveys of people going in and measuring how many batteries were installed. How often you want it to be measured, it's up to you to define what is best there. In this case, it says at the midpoint at the project close. Depends also on the duration of the project. It could be, once a month or once every 2 months, depending on how long the project is going to go for. And then who's responsible? In this case, it could be the partner, it could be the volunteers, it could be, community leaders. You have to assign someone to be responsible of measuring the success or tracking the success of this output. And then where it's going to be reported, it could be once the project is finalized, you put it in the final report. It could be in a paper, if you're submitting a paper to a conference, it could be there. It could be, in a meeting with, community leaders. So you have to include all these information of where the reporting is going to go. And that's important because you also want to, share about the success of your project. Here's an example that in the name of time, I'm just going to go through it quickly. Here's an example that we developed for a project we're doing with digital literacy. So we were talking about training modules being developed and, how many modules we were going to create in the end, how much it costs to create a module, bring in experts and prepare the slides and so on. And how often we're going to measure this at the start or the end of the project and where the information is going to go. So once I'm sharing the slides with you, you're going to be able to look at all those different indicators outputs and outcomes that we prepared in a project we were working with for supporting capacity building with digital technologies. So moving on, we're going to talk about how to look at the project implementation plan, which is section 4 of the project proposal. So it's important to consider the work plan, the milestones, what team is going to be implemented, and potential risks. So you have to make sure you have a good project implementation and management plan. So you have to go back to your, to to your logic model and look at the inputs, what are the activities that are going to be conducted with those inputs, and how those activities lead to the outcomes and outputs you want to create. So you have to identify clear tasks that are required, include milestones. At some point you want to be at this point of the project, at this point of the project. It's important to include dates. Check the duration of the project, because if it's a 6 months project, you may want to have, milestones every month, every few weeks. Check if there's any restrictions with mobility, travel, shipping that might impact the project. So, if you're bringing in solar panels from a different country, the amount of time that they'll take to get to where the site is might be longer than you expect. So it's always a good idea to check with your IEEE section or with other people that are working in similar projects than you, how long it took to get through those shipping times, because that could be a major impact to your project. It's important to assemble a team that has the combined experience to credibly execute the project. So, as I said before, the applicants to be an IEEE professional member, and it's a good idea to involve IEEE sections, IEEE chapters, branches, just to make them aware of your project, and also involve volunteers wherever you see fit. Include volunteers with relevant experience and ideally fieldwork experience. So, if you're going to do a solar implementation, you want to follow all the right steps and the right procedures. So you want to have ideally volunteers that have experience with solar systems or with battery work. You want to have, engineers and professors that have that experience in your team in order to successfully execute your project. One thing that it's not discussed enough also is identify and address potential risks. So just because there's a potential risk in not completing the project, it doesn't mean that the project won't be funded. It's better to identify how to address that potential risk and include it into your proposal, so that the reviewers know that you're aware of this issue and you have a plan to how to address it. So make sure you consider how your potential risk and how they could be mitigated, and consider any legal and government approvals you need to execute your project. If you need some type of municipal permit to go into a community, or if you need to sign any consent forms for the community or from IEEE, all of those things you need to consider that you're completing one while you're planning for the project to be implemented. So make sure you're aware of all those requirements while you're planning, so you don't have any surprises down the road when you're implementing the project. The final section I'm going to be talking about is funding, and that's one of the most important sections, because that's where what allows you to get equipment and get to the point that you're able to implement the project. So how to prepare the budget for the project? So again, the first thing is to check the call for proposals. The funding amount must be stated, and the limits of funding that you can ask for must be stated in the call for proposals, as well as what are the the restrictions on when you can or can't spend money on. So consider the items in your budget that are required for the implementation of the project. Make sure that you have a justification for each item that you're considering, because that you need to include in your proposal. So you need to, in addition to just put, an amount, so for example, solar panels cost, X amount, you need to provide a justification for each item that you put. So you have to put, I'm buying solar panels because the solar radiation is the best, alternative for powering lighting in the community, or something along those lines. It's helpful to get more than one quote for each item included in the budget. At least in the IEEE Ecuador section, you need to get at least 3 quotes for each item that you are planning to purchase. So it's a good idea to get them upfront and make sure you can, put the right estimate for the price in your budget. And then it's also important to check with the operational unit or IEEE section about additional fees you might need to consider. For example, if you need to exchange some currency from, dollars to something else, or if there's import taxes or fees, administrative fees that are charged by transfers or bank statements. So all those things you need to know upright, so you can include those as operational or administrative costs, and you can, justify them in your budget, so you don't have any surprises down the road when you're purchasing the equipment. It's important to not include salaries or honorariums. It's not that you can't, it's this type of proposal is more geared towards IEEE volunteers. So of course that sometimes the work needs to be, verified or done by certified engineers or professional engineers. So for example, the work we did with fiber optic installations, we need to contract the internet service provider. So in that we couldn't do it any other way. So we needed to include that cost into the budget. But in general, do not include salaries, do not include honorariums, do not include travel, particularly international, because this is looking to really engage with local volunteers and local sections. So whenever possible, try to work with local volunteers in their communities to limit travel costs, and it's a good amount that you save in your budget if you try to follow these suggestions. So this is what the budget templates looks like. So again, you have like on the left your project title, and you have all the list of expenses and things you want to purchase. But one thing I do want to note is there's also an option to put funding support requests from other sources. So if you have another funding source that you want to consider as well, you might want to put it here. That will give more, weight to your project if you have funding sources additional to just the IEEE source. And I'll just give a quick example. So in the projects that we've worked on, we have student volunteers from ESPOL, which is one of the main universities in Ecuador, because before students graduate from ESPOL, they need a certain amount of industry experience and a certain amount of social community development experience. So they are willing to support student travel and student like food and housing for them to develop projects. So we sort of add that as a support for the project, and we can use the full amount from IEEE side or HAC to purchase all the equipment that's required for the project. So that's a way of looking for additional funding support from different institutions in order to further the project. So in this case, it was done through ESPOL University. They were able to provide that additional support, and that's always adds weight to the project, and that you have more than one source to develop it. So some final thoughts and suggestions, some hints and tips to writing a good HAC proposal. Make sure that you're engaged with local stakeholders in the local community. Make sure that you're addressing at least one of the sustainable development goals. Make sure that the project falls within the scope of an HAC or site project. Make sure that you have a good assessment, monitoring, and evaluation plan. Make sure that you have a good management plan for all the activities you're going to be doing with proper milestones. Make sure that you have a good, strong budget, and consider all those additional fees and potential risks, and have good justification for all the items you're going to include in there. Make sure you got a good set of volunteers, you have a strong team to work on the project. And finally, just make sure to write the proposal in good English, because the reviewers are gonna take that into account when they're going through the proposal. So that's all that I had today. May have taken a few extra minutes, but I'm open to any questions. I'm happy to answer any questions. And you can also contact me later if you have any additional questions. So yeah, thank you very much for your attention, and let me know if you have any additional questions.
Thank you, sir. Participants, you can unmute yourself and you can interact with the speaker. If you have any doubts, please ask. Participants, you can unmute yourself and you can ask any queries. Participants, you can unmute yourself. If you have any doubts, please ask. Participants, if you have any doubts, you can interact with the speaker. There is a question. How they select proposal for funding?
Sorry, can you repeat the question again?
Yeah, how they select proposal for funding?
Well, I guess once you submit the proposal, it takes a few, weeks and a little bit of time that goes through before you get a response. But generally, I think if you have a strong, management plan and you have a strong budget and you have a good shot of getting funded for your proposal. Like I said, I've been writing for proposal for HAC and site for a few years now. So I think as long as you consider and you clearly articulate that you're working with the community and have really clear goals, you're very likely to get funding. If not, sometimes you don't get the full amount that you're asking for, but you will get some funding that will allow you to, break up your project in phases. And I think that's something that's always important to do. So if you're not able to get the full amount for your project, you could break up your project in phases, complete a certain amount of work and then reapply again. And that way you'll, after a few iterations, you'll get to where you want to be with your project. So I don't know if that at least gives you a little bit of insight. I've not been part of the reviewing committee, but in my experience, clearly articulating your commitment and work with the community, having a good plan and good budget are the most important things.
Yeah, thank you, sir. There is one more question. Venkatesh, sir, you raised your hand. Please unmute yourself.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
First of all, thank you the team of IEEE for organizing such a great event, and congratulations, Madhu sir. That was a great. You are using the platform very well and very organized meeting it was. And sir, I have a query regarding this.
Sure.
So when we are talking about the project proposal, so if I am a principal investigator to that project, do I need some research background? Like, do I have some research background? In the case, like, do I have any publications related to that subject area, what I am applying?
I don't think it's required. Sorry.
Yeah. Should I have? Is it mandatory that should I have? Like, I should have that research background to go for the proposal?
No, it's not mandatory. I mean, it's always it's always good to have, somebody with experience within your team. So let's say if you're the principal investigator or the main person behind the project, if you can get collaborators from within your IEEE section, or if you can get even from abroad, if you can have people supporting the project, maybe not physically being there, but at least guiding the project, I think that's always helpful. So Dr. Pritpal Singh, my advisor at the university, he usually is involved with working with different IEEE sections and IEEE site groups, and more than happy then advise you and be part of your team. And that don't necessarily means that he's going to be traveling, so you don't have to account for those costs, but he's always ready and happy to advise and be part of your implementing team. So I think that also brings us a certain strength and weight to your proposal, but by no means it's mandatory that you have it.
Yeah. Thank you for your patience. Thank you.
Yeah. No, thank you for your question.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, sir. There is one more question in chat box. Entire world is to renewable energy side. As we develop project based on these batteries, can lithium-ion batteries can be replaced because our projects are used to increase e-waste? So may does not obey UNDP 17 goals.
Yeah, for sure. We, if I understand your question correctly, we want to, be mindful about the type of waste we create in the duration of the project. So if wherever you can find alternative methods to, consider the most sustainable alternative, it doesn't have to be solar energy every time, but, solar is becoming cheaper and cheaper to the point that it's one of the most sustainable and important options to consider. So wherever you can find programs, for example, that can replace or reuse batteries, that'll be important too. I don't know if you have those available within your IEEE section or in your city, but it's always important to look at elsewhere where you can consider that into your project as well. So generally the project won't be the project proposal won't be longer than a year or 6 months, but it's always nice if you consider what are you going to do with the equipment once it's finished. I think there's not enough research in recycling batteries. I think a lot of the current research is looking at reusing batteries wherever possible, but that's definitely one thing we need to we as a community, engineering community, we need to start thinking more about. So again, my suggestion will be wherever possible, look for the best alternative, the most sustainable alternative. If lithium-ion batteries or lead acid batteries is your only option, then look for programs where you can mostly recycle them or reuse them in another application wherever possible. I think there's a raised hand too.
Thank you, sir. There is a hand raised by Sidhu. Please unmute yourself, ask the speaker. Sidhu, raise. Sir, we take the project into real time. How can take which type of reference to take? We take the project into real time. We can take which type to take?
Yeah, I'm not sure I understand. It says on the comment section, we take the project into real time, we can take which type of reference? Can you elaborate a little bit more?
You can unmute and speak. Sairam, you can unmute and interact with the speaker.
Sir, grateful. Thank you giving me a chance.
Yes, can you elaborate on the question? What do you mean by the type of reference?
When we going to a real-time project, we will take which type of references, like research papers or any, which type of, I'm asking like that one.
Oh, you're talking about sources of information to, put together your project. I think I covered some of those at the beginning. I think if you go to IEEE site and IEEE HAC, there's going to be a lot of good information. One thing I don't think I mentioned is it's always good to be an IEEE member. IEEE student members. There's a great discount that you can have if you're an IEEE student member. You can be an IEEE site member. That's free. You don't have to pay anything to be an IEEE site member. And if you go to IEEE site's webpage, you can always get access to, projects that's been funded in the past. So that, allows you to get some information of what to expect in terms of, the duration of the project, the amount of work that's involved, how much funding was requested, as well as, getting a sense of what projects have been approved and funded. So I think that's a good source of information that I didn't mention before, but also when you get to all the go into the call for proposals, there's some information there. You can go to online to IEEE Explore and look at papers on humanitarian efforts. We've written a number of papers. So if you look for my name, there's going to be, papers on the projects we've developed, and look for the Global Humanitarian Technology Conference. There's a lot of good people from IEEE doing projects all over the world that, there's good insights that you can get through reading those papers. So I think there's a lot of information, and I'm going to share those slides with Madhu at the end. So if you want to go over them, they can also do that and look at the sources I mentioned before.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Sir, before closing the session, I would like to take a group picture. Please close your screen sharing, sir.
Oh, sure. No problem.
Participants, please switch on your cameras. Participants, please switch on your cameras so that I can capture a moment. Participants, please switch on your cameras. At the count of 5, 4, participants, please switch on your cameras. Yeah. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Rajeshwari, please continue.
Yeah, I think there's a few more questions.
Yes.
Yes, sir. Sir, thank you so much for this exceptional event today. So I just want to ask a few questions. Just please lend me some time. Just few seconds, sir.
Sure. No
So
problem.
according to me, the contemporary society is always thinking to save the renewable energy sources, right? Because we have a scarcity of them. So what are the most energy efficient appliances would you suggest us to save the renewable energy sources?
Most energy efficient appliances, like what's
Yes, sir.
can you give me a little bit more context of the project? Are you looking at appliances at the home?
Yes, sir. So, in order to save the renewable energy sources, we have some energy efficient appliances like battery cars. You know, we are replacing the appliances what we are using in these days, sir. So, I'm expecting some energy efficient appliances. You're looking forward to them.
Yeah. Well, if I understand your question correctly, one of the things you always want to do is, as I mentioned in my presentation, is you want to work with a community. You want to, have the community go through a series of workshops and train them and build their capacity in terms of what they can do, what they can't do, and what are best practices in terms of trying to preserve the energy and efficiency of the project. So for example, if you have, in our case, we have the rehabilitation of solar home systems, and we told them, I mean, this is like, imagine the battery as a bucket of water. You can connect the TV, you can connect the lighting, you can connect the radio, you can do this and that, but every time you connect stuff, it's like you're taking water out of the bucket. The solar panel refills that bucket, but it's had to be a good balance between what you can or what you can't do. So for us, we give them some guidelines of, you want to connect LED light bulbs because they're more energy efficient. It's a difference of a few watts versus 100 watts for an incandescent light bulb. So you want to connect LED TVs if you have it, not huge TVs, smaller TVs if possible. If you can do radio, you can do cell phone charging, try to look for appliances and things that are not consuming a lot of energy. So if they asked us for connecting an air conditioner, we said, oh, no, you can connect the fan, for example. If they want to do washing machine or something like that's a little bit over the amount of bucket of water that you have available. So I think it's all about working with a community, make them understand what are the limits of the implementation that you have, because of course you have a set amount of budget you can install. You can't put 100 batteries into a community. So you have to make the community aware of that and make what do I want to say? You want to manage expectations of what they can do and what they can't do. So you don't want to say you can do whatever with this. You rather want to say you could do this in order to continue and maintain the project working for a number of years. So I don't know if that helps, but that's
yes, sir. Thank you so much. That was an incredible thing. So thank you very much for encouraging us to do such an exceptional things.
Oh, thank you very much, and thank you for those very thoughtful questions and for being here.
Thank you, Nephew. So thank you so much. And I also I'm requesting all the participants, if you have any queries, please unmute yourself.
One question from Raghu Institute. He raised his hand. Raghu Institute participant is there? Raghu Institute of Tech.
Yes, sir.
You can unmute and you can see.
Yes, sir. Am I audible?
Yes.
Sir, am I audible?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yes.
Yes, sir. Thanks for your valuable time to share about the projects. Thank you, sir. And I have a doubt. So I have a doubt, sir, about the project. So it is when we last the project, which is in the last stage, it is somewhat difficult to go into the last stage because we do many researches and working on many theses rather than the step into that. So when we enter into the last stage, it is difficult to reach a complete society, and also it takes many years to reach to entire world. Is there any way, being a common man, we can reach entire world within less time?
Yeah, I'm not sure I understand. So you said you are working on, well, when you're working on the final stages of the project, you want to continue working and, you know, reach other people so you can, you know, reach a larger community or the entire world if you can. That's your question, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I think that's where, you know, working with IEEE, one of the great assets of IEEE is the IEEE network. You know, I'm almost all the way across the world from you guys, and you know, we're able to interact and we're able to, you know, exchange ideas. So if you have a project and, you know, you're almost done with it and you have some good results, some good insights that you want to share with the world, and you know, but most of the times these projects are replicable. So the project that I'm working on here in Ecuador may be very similar to a project you want to work on in India. So I think the best way to do that, to reach a larger audience, is to, you know, go to these events, IEEE events, go to conferences. It doesn't cost you anything to, you know, write a good paper and submit it to GHCC. There's a generally, if you're a student, generally there's a lot of good, you know, discounts and some support for students travel to these conferences. So I think if you want to, you know, make people aware of what you're doing and share your results, connect with other engineers from the IEEE network. You can write papers and try to put them in, or posters, or in conferences, and use these events to, you know, share about the results you've achieved, and that way, you know, you can spread the word and reach a larger audience. I think that's one way, or that's the way I found that you can, you know, spread the word and spread your learnings from your project with a larger audience. And you know, in these conferences you get people from all over the world, so that'll be your best shot to, you know, do it quickly and you know, in a controlled setting that's, you know, precisely for that, to share your experiences and best practices with the community.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Thank you, sir. Ajay sir, please continue. Next one.
Okay, then. Thank you for
Excuse me, madam.
participating.
Excuse me, madam. The feedback form is not completely filled with options. That is, there is no submission option is there.
Yeah, I will check it.
Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Continue.
Thank you so much for participating in such a great event conducted by our resource person. So, if any queries, please raise your hand, and then we'll end the session for today. So, dear participants, if you have any queries regarding the session, you can raise your hand and ask the person. Sir, shall I move to vote of thanks?
Yeah, please wind up. Please wind up.
Since this webinar on IEEE PES Day 2022 celebration session came to an end, I'm requesting Sai Charan, the member of IEEE, to convey the vote of thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Rajeshwari. Sai Charan, IEEE Student Branch Chairperson. On behalf of IEEE Student Branch, I extend a really heart vote of thanks to our resource person, Javier sir, who spread time from his busiest schedule to provide the information about writing HAC or a site proposal. Today we had an opportunity to hear the procedure and your thoughts, and this will surely going to encourage us and help us in our future projects. My gratitude to Javier sir. Thank you for accepting our request and response.
Thank you very much for having me.
To our request to Principal Sir, Dr. S. Suresh Kumar Sir, for being the catalyst that
Charan, you are unmuted.
Charan.
Special mention to our respected Principal Sir, Dr. S. Suresh Kumar Garu, for being the catalyst that simulated us to do our best and standing as a pillar of the strength. Thank you, sir. Without you can't organize this event. Any event like this wouldn't happen overnight. The wheels start rolling weeks ago. It requires planning and a board of eye for details. We have been fortunate enough to be backed up by our advisor and counselor, Professor V. Madhu sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you for your support. Last but not least, let us thank a big thank you to each and everyone. So thank you all.
Thank you, Javier sir, for your cooperation, for your wonderful session.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. Participants, there is a problem in the Google form. Please send a mail to the scat@gmail.com. Please send your mail ID to this mail so that we can dispatch e-certificate very soon. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Javier sir.
Thank you. Have a good rest of your day.
Dear participants,